In this part of our tutorial, we're going to take a look at if statements within functions. Now we've seen functions and we've seen if statements. Let's combine the two. So we're just going to create a function with an if statement in it. And we're going to use the example of a game, so a Mario game, performing a check each time the game state is updated. So basically this function will just be called and it will perform a check. Up until now we've seen functions that have void return types and non-void return types, and functions that take in parameters or don't. Now we're going to combine two concepts. We're going to combine the concept of an if statement with a function. So we're basically going to put an if statement within a function. Now for this video, I want you to think about a video game such as Mario, for example. So you have your character, and then you have these enemies where if you touch the enemy, then basically you lose a life or you die or the game is over. So basically we have two characters and each has a position. So let's just create some integers right now. So we'll say this one is Mario position, and we'll give him the position of 5, and then we'll have Goomba position. And let's give Goomba the position of 4. And this should have the underscore here. So again, think about this video game. Your character is moving, so Mario's moving. If he touches a Goomba, he loses a life, basically, or gets shrunk, or whatever. So this is going to be what we call a game state check. And I'll explain that as I go. So we want to just make this a void function. I don't want it to return anything. I want it to basically just be a check. So this function is just going to see if the position of Mario and Goomba are the same, and if they are, if they're touching, then we're going to lose a life, and if they're not, then we're still in the clear. So this one is going to say, this function is going to be check if touching, and here we go, we're just setting up. Okay, so I want to input two parameters into it this time. I want to input the Mario position, and I want to input the Goomba position. Okay, and basically we're going to just put the if statement in here, and we've seen this before. I mean, when we made our if statements, or when we declared our if statements in the previous tutorials, we put them within a function anyway. We put them generally within the viewDidLoad function in here, or the onCreate function in Android. So this is just going to perform the check, and it's going to test the statement if Mario position equals Goomba position, then we're going to lose a life. So first have to create another integer that is lives, and we'll say we start off with 3 lives. I think we usually start off with. So we're going to say lives equals lives minus 1. Okay, so this function is not returning anything, which is why we have a void. All it's going to do is it's going to update the number of lives we have if Mario touches one of the Goombas. And now we're just going to go ahead and call it in the viewDidLoad. We're going to say check if touching, and we're going to give it the Mario position and the Goomba position. Okay, so this might seem a little more basic than what we did in our last video, but this is just incorporating an if statement into a function. So if you're going to design a big game, you'll probably see a lot of these. These are game state checks. So at what we call each tick of the game, so basically when the code runs and performs these checks, it's going to check in our case to see if the Mario position is the same as a Goomba position, and it's going to do this with what we call each tick, each time the game state changes. So it performs this check to see if they're touching, and if they are, then we'll lose a life, and if they're not, then nothing will happen. So again, you'll see a lot of these in big games, at least in the older ones. So let's go ahead and print out the number of lives just to see that this is working. And we're going to say the text is, we're going to have it print out lives. And we're going to have to change that to a string because it's an integer right now. Okay, very good. Just get rid of that because we no longer need it. Cool. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this. We are in iOS, so we're going to run with the iPhone 5S. Yeah, so each tick, again, you might have this function being called, so check if touching, and if they are, then we'll lose a life. And because they're not, we have Mario at position 5 and Goomba at position 4, so we still have 3 lives. However, if we were to, on the next tick, maybe Mario hasn't moved, but the Goomba has moved and is now touching Mario. So we're going to run it again, and let's see what we come up with. I'm going to get rid of that. And we get 2 now. So we lost a life because the Goomba touched Mario. Because that's the next tick, and the Goomba moved forward 1 and ended up touching Mario. So we're only calling it once, but what we would have basically is, as I was saying before, the game state is what we call ticking, so it's going to perform these checks every however long the tick is, maybe let's say every second. It's going to tick forward, so all the positions are going to change, and it's going to have to run this check every time. So this is where functions like this come in very handy, is that we can just call the function here, so check if touching, and we'll pass it in these, and we only need to call the function once rather than performing this check every single time and then having to write this code over and over again. And that's really the beauty of functions, is that it performs that task so that you only have to write the code once, and then you just call the function whenever you need that task performed. That's what's really great about them, and it's also just a great way to organize your code so that it doesn't get all jammed into one function and confusing. So this is basically just what it looks like to incorporate an if statement into a function. We can add an else clause if we want, so we have an else, and so we have the lives -1 if they're touching. If not, then maybe print out some kind of a message. We can have, in fact, yeah, let's have a little message print out, and we'll say the text is Mario is still alive. Okay, and in fact we'll not print out the number of lives because that's generally not what we do. We just update the lives variable. We'll have some kind of a print statement here. Mario has lost a life. Okay, so every time we update a variable, we don't have to print it out. I know I've been printing these variables out, but that's only to show you how they've changed. That's not something we have to do, and in a lot of programs that's not something that they would do. It's just a way to update the variable. And it's enough just to update it. So let's go ahead and print it. We know what would happen if the positions do touch, so we know Mario's lost a life, but we'll just run it in both situations anyway. So in this case, they both are in the same position, they're both touching, so Mario should lose a life. Mario's lost a life, that's very good, and we know lives should have gone down to 2, but we didn't bother printing it out. Now, let's say the next tick, Goomba's at position 6, and Mario still hasn't moved. So now, in this case, the positions are not equal, so we should get the other statement being printed. And there we go, Mario is still alive. Excellent. So this is an if statement in a function, and there's even the else. It's really not so different from what we were doing before with the if statements. This part of our tutorial, we looked at if statements within functions. So we did this by creating a function that checks to see if Mario and Goomba are touching with each iteration of the game. So basically there was just the if statement, and it we had a position for Mario and a position for Goomba, and the if statement was just checking to see if those two positions are equal. If they are, we lose a life. So this function was called in the onCreate function. Okay, so by now you should be able to incorporate if statements into functions and understand where functions that perform these checks are useful. So you'll see a lot of these kind of functions in games that are just performing these checks. So it's basically, is this condition true? And if it is, then make this happen. And that check will happen at each iteration of the game, or each tick as we would call it.